This is an island surrounded by water, big water, ocean water. Trust me, I'm like a smart person. I'm very consistent. I'm a very stable genius. I had the best words. Tolerated. I know words. Mike Pounds. I hope they now go and take a look at the oranges of the investigation. But there's no better word than stupid. Anonymous, really anonymous. I'm very highly educated. One of the wettest we've ever seen from the standpoint of water. Had the best words. God bless the United States.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the show. Around the Nation right here, TYT Nation. Jeff Waldorf here with you. So we got a great show for you guys today. It's Tuesday, which means, of course, we got another debate tonight. That should be pretty interesting. So this is the first debate where Bernie Sanders is undisputably the front runner. I know that in the last debate, the Nevada debate, Mike Bloomberg was the newcomer, so he absorbed a lot of the incoming fire. Now... Well, look, Bernie Sanders, of course, crushed Bloomberg and crushed pretty much everyone else in the Nevada caucus, going 3 for 3 in the popular vote, meaning that I think all the fire is going to be out for Bernie. So now if you watched Bernie Sanders' town hall at all last night, you'll know that he's pretty much ready for a lot of these questions. And so we're going to see how that develops tonight. But man, I think it's going to be another hard-hitting, going to be an interesting debate. You see Bernie Sanders on the defensive, and we're going to see what kind of attacks they're going to throw at him. So, interesting, fun stuff. Now, as far as today goes, we got a lot of good stories for you today. We're going to go and make a little bit of fun of Donald Trump Jr. And his attempt to not be an elitist. I know. Strange stuff. We're going to point out why that's ridiculous. Then we're going to go to Chris Matthews and his apology towards Bernie Sanders. Then we've got a couple of highlights from last night's town hall, where Bernie Sanders answers a question, of course, about look, it's the same question basically. How are you going to pay for it? Well, we know exactly how you're going to pay for it, and I'm going to detail that on the show. Then we have, of course, Bernie Sanders being the most electable candidate. And there's a lot of pieces of information that I'm going to present to you guys that proves that Bernie Sanders is the most electable and shows why, of course, a lot of people are now heading over and joining Bernie Sanders. And it's a wonderful thing. And then finally, Buttigieg gets chased out of a rally. Fun. So, altogether, pretty good show. Before we, of course, continue with the show, please like and share the stream. Very important that you do so. It helps out greatly, and we could always use your help here on the show. There's a couple of different ways for you to do it. Again, liking and sharing is perfectly, extremely helpful, actually. So thank you for those who do that. But those who want to go a little bit extra, there's, of course, our super chats, which are always welcome. I love to read your super chat comments, member comments as well. One little perk of membership, as I like to read your comments on air. And then, of course, through being a member. And in order to do that, hit the join button below and Patreon, of course. So all different ways to help independent progressive media as we continue to push forward with progressive policies and commentary. All right. So let's move on. Let's go again to our fun story here where we see people dunking on Don Jr. It's always fun. Donald Trump Jr.'s attempt to paint himself as a man of the people, a regular American person, backfired, basically. Now, according to Raw Story, the eldest son of billionaire President Donald Trump shared on Instagram a photo that someone had taken of him traveling in coach on a flight from Las Vegas to Phoenix ahead of his father's rally. In fact, I'm going to show you that picture here. And oh, look at that. So, hey, look, nothing wrong with a fan taking a picture. Hey, Trump fan. Now, I love how he says, how cool is this? He's traveling from Las Vegas to Phoenix, center row, coach. Don't anyone tell me the Trump family doesn't know how real Americans live. Bet you won't be seeing any Democratic presidential hopefuls flying like this. So now, on that post, that when he shared it, he basically, in the caption, explained why he's a regular person, why he's not a member of the elites, right? In fact, he said, I like fishing, hunting, red meat, trucks, and guns. And yes, I usually fly coach, but preferably not intentional middle seat. Okay. But here's the thing. There's a lot of holes in that story, right? For one, Donald Jr. has always been incredibly wealthy, grew up wealthy. That doesn't necessarily make you a regular person. At the very least, liking guns and trucks, etc., makes you a rich redneck. Now, the whole thing about, oh, fishing, hunting, red meat, whatever. I like red meat. I like a good steak. And unlike your dad, I don't put ketchup on it or burn it. I'm just saying. You put ketchup on a steak and you eat it, well done, you're not an American. It's un-American. You can't do that. It has to be at least medium rare, if not rare, to be considered American. I'm just saying. But again, he's a rich redneck then, right? But you still have all the money in the world to indulge your hobbies. That, again, does not make you a regular person. And it doesn't mean that you understand regular person because you literally grew up in the lap of luxury. Come back to me when you've worked a 40-hour job in the factory at $10 an hour to get by. What this does is that there's a term called poverty tourism, right? It's where it's where rich people like to go to the areas of where there are less affluent people. And they like to go there and to see how they live. Now, generally, that means they go to really poor areas and see how they live. But in this case, all you have to do is have somebody who's supposedly worth millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars to come to a place or, do a thing that normal people do and then say, oh, my God, I'm just like you guys. Look at me, look at me, look at me. That's what this is all about, right? I'm slumming it with the poors. I'm just like you guys. What? Suffice to say, there were people that were not amused by this. Seth Maskett on Twitter pointed out a couple of different things. The average American hasn't even flown in the last year. That's true. Look, last year when I took a flight to Philly, that was literally my first flight ever. And somebody else paid for it. So thank you guys, by the way, over at Mythicist Milwaukee. So, and Myth Informed. That was awesome. Thank you for that. First flight ever. So generally, yes, most Americans don't generally take flights everywhere. Now, Maskett also points out that Beto O'Rourke flew coach on Southwest last year. And you know why? It's because when you take Southwest, all they have is coach. And that's it. And several other posters on Twitter pointed that out. Okay. Now, when you post a picture, this is again Seth, in coach to point out how much of a regular guy you are, it suggests that this is not typically how you travel. That's a great point. Rebel Mel says, "Look at me, I'm just like the Poors." Just like the Poors. Mehdi Hassan points out, it is Southwest. He couldn't even fly first class in that flight if he wanted to. They don't have first class, especially when it comes to short flights like that. Okay. So now, Robert McGuire points out, bet you the line, bet you won't be seeing any Democratic presidential hopefuls flying like this. Well, not true. We got pictures. Hold on. Oh, look at that. We have Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren on a flight for Detroit. And then, oh, look at that. Again, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, looks like coach, economy class. Weird. But you wouldn't see any Democratic candidates flying like this. Oh, no, it's just Don Jr. Because he's a man of the people. Now, look, the reason that that he is getting mocked in this is because many of the Democrats do end up flying coach or economy. And when they do, by the way, you're not seeing Bernie Sanders posting this all over the internet saying, hey, look at me, I'm just like you. No. The thing is that it's the Trumps, right? And it's literally in their DNA to shamelessly market themselves as something that they are not. Like, for example, their father being a president, or Ivanka being a smart person, a smart businesswoman. Just marketing. It's not real. And yet somehow he does have the authorities of president. And Jesus. All right. Now, back to some of the tweets here. AJ Delgado says, it's like those U.S. Weekly features that the gullible lap up of celebrities. They're just like us, where the elites try to convince you that an actress is just like you because she took a taxi somewhere. Yep. Jeff says, Vegas to Phoenix flight is equivalent to an elevator ride up 5 floors, meaning that it's actually less than an hour flight. So, call me when you have a 6-hour flight in coach. Just saying. Women are the majority says, an hour in coach, the tragedy of it all. The humanity. And Jeep 1422 says, dude really spent an hour on a coach flight and thinks he knows what it's like to be an average American. Again, look, it's what they do. It's marketing, right? And it is funny that he says he's not an elitist when Donald Trump literally calls himself an elitist.
I was reading last night, Brennan.
A little thing I was talking about today. You ever notice they always call the other side, and they do this up, the elite. The elite. Why are they elite? I have a much better apartment than they do. I'm smarter than they are. I'm richer than they are. I became president and they didn't. And I'm representing the greatest, smartest, most loyal, best people on earth. The deplorables, remember that?
Hey, look at me. I'm better than the elite. I'm richer than the elite. Well, then that would probably make you the elite now, wouldn't it? Kind of a far cry from the elitist bad messaging that his son seems to be going for. Kind of goes against the whole thing. Whoops. Anyway, now the whole thing, of course, is based on the Trumps really wanting to fit in with Washington, but because Trump was for a very long time synonymous with a joke, they never could. They never could fit in. The thing that really turned it around was The Apprentice, where Trump literally got famous for firing people. I don't know how people were conned into thinking that Trump was just like them. I guess the only thing I can think of is because Trump leaned into hating the same people that they hate. Black people, liberals, people who are intelligent, who correct them when they're wrong. Oh, they hate that. They hate the actually guy, right? Which, of course, a lot of liberals, a lot of progressives especially, are the actually guys that are like, no, what you're saying is actually a lie. And then, of course, uppity women. Oh, they hate all that. And so when you put it in context, I guess their support of Donald Trump makes sense. Okay. Anyway. By the way, Jeanette, I do apologize. I accidentally deleted your comment. And I didn't mean to. So my apologies. It was a perfectly fine comment. Okay. Anyway, my apologies. So I love you guys. And so when I do something wrong, when I mess something up, I apologize for it. Speaking of getting messing things up, I got to fix that second or that first video here. So give me a second.
You know, a little thing I was talking.
Okay. And then let me just get that ready. Moving on to the next one here. Yeah, I kind of have to do it live because there's no other way that my equipment works. So just letting you know about that. All right. Eldridge Davids, by the way, before we get into the next segment, says they're the poorly educated. Yep. Let's see. Okay, I'm not going to say that. All right. Okay, now let's move on. With the realization that Bernie Sanders is a Democratic frontrunner and following the calls for his ouster, now that's MSNBC Chris Matthews' ouster, he opened his show Monday night with an apology to Bernie Sanders. Now, that's after, during the Nevada caucus, Matthews made an awful comparison to Sanders being the frontrunner, comparing his wins to the time when the Nazis literally took France. Now, I'm going to show you that video, and then we're going to show you the apology.
I was reading last night, Brian. I know you're a history guy, too. I'm reading last night about the fall of France in the summer of 1940. And the general, Renault, calls up Churchill and says, it's over.
All right. So that's what he said about Bernie. About Bernie winning Nevada. That's insane. Why would you want to make that a comparison, history buff or not? I mean, it's crazy. Now, I've got an explanation for it. But first, I'm going to show you the video where he apologizes due to, of course, the massive backlash there was from progressives. Take a look.
As I watched the one-sided results of Saturday's Democratic caucus in Nevada, I reached for an historical analogy and used a bad one. I was wrong to refer to an event from the last days, or actually the first days of World War II. Senator Sanders, I'm sorry for comparing anything from that tragic era in which so many suffered, especially the Jewish people, to an electoral result in which you were the well-deserved winner. This is going to be a hard-fought, heated campaign of ideas. In the days and weeks and months ahead, I will strive to do a better job myself of elevating the political discussion. Congratulations, by the way, to you, Senator Sanders, and to your supporters on a tremendous win down in Nevada.
All right, so he looked a little pained, right? Like, I really don't want to apologize, but I guess I'm going to apologize. And to be fair, actually really was a decent apology. Okay, so now here's the thing. I actually don't think that he meant to make an analogy of Bernie Sanders to a Nazi, right? So this is actually kind of different from the Chuck Todd situation, because Chuck Todd really did want to make that comparison. He brought up the quote himself from a conservative writer, right, who called Bernie Sanders' army a digital brown shirts. And so he brought it up of his own volition and was like, hey, this guy, digital brown shirts. I mean, come on. But no. Chuck Todd, definitely worse. With Matthews, I think it's a little deeper than that, right? It's the fact that he reached to a World War II analogy and one of the most devastating battles of the war and the collapse of the Maginot Line as sort of an allegory or a bit of a metaphor. And I think that's reflective of his personal anxiety about his own power and influence, or the fact that he actually starts to lose this power and influence. I mean, again, for months on his show, he's basically been saying, Bernie Sanders, dangerous. Don't vote for Bernie Sanders. He's going to lose to Donald Trump. He's going to hurt the country. Sanders is bad. He's a socialist. There's Cuba. There's Venezuela. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Whatever you do not vote for Bernie Sanders. Okay. Now, all of those, of course, are not only right-wing talking points and useless Red Scare baiting, but also completely wrong. Bernie Sanders polls the best against Donald Trump. He is massively electable. But here's the thing that matters, right? The most is that people are no longer listening to Chris Matthews. There was a time where people like James Carville and Chris Matthews and all those, old school pundits had actually, were right in the way that they understood the political landscape. But what we saw and what we've been seeing since 2016 is that they no longer understand it. And in fact, they haven't understood it since 2008, right? Oh, for a very, very long time. In fact, Nicole Wallace, when she was doing the coverage of the Nevada caucuses, I just don't understand voters anymore. I don't understand them. And this is a similar refrain that you hear from a lot of these television pundits. Like, I don't get it. My old political playbooks don't work anymore. Nothing is going as expected. We expected somebody like, going back to 2016, for example, or 2015, even further into the Republican primaries, nobody expected Donald Trump to win, except for a lot of us in independent media who were saying, no, Donald Trump, he is going to win. It's very likely he's going to win the nomination. And it's very likely that if you put up an establishment candidate like Hillary Clinton, for example, you're going to lose. So now what happened? Donald Trump won the Republican nomination. And just like we on this show had been warning people, Donald Trump, if you put up Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump is going to win. He's going to win. And that's exactly what happened. And the media has not learned from that. They do not believe in upstart outsider candidates. They think, oh no, the establishment is great. Everybody loves the establishment. Everybody's doing fantastic. And so these outsider candidates, they have absolutely no chance. But this isn't 1984 anymore. You're not, hanging around with Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. No, the rule book has completely changed. Matthews himself seems to still be stuck back in 1984. So no longer are people listening to any of his analysis since he's wrong. And not only that, but he's also facing a possible, with Bernie Sanders, an increase in his taxes. Now, that's one thing that he does not like. He's also witnessing the very thing that he cherishes, the horse race, the media, the government, being described as corrupted by big money, which is true. That kind of realization is something that is terrible for someone like Chris Matthews, whose identity is really kind of wrapped up in this. Okay. And that's the thing too. A lot of these personalities, their entire purpose is wrapped up in the politics and the horse race of it all. Right. And that's why they can't get off their thinking. That's why they're in this bubble. And so when you pop that, who is Chris Matthews without his political analysis and his influence and his money? Nothing. And that's what he's afraid of the most, I think. And so the change is happening and will continue to happen because of Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders, to someone like Chris, is probably the worst thing that could happen. Losing your influence and your place in the discourse to the changing politics of the era and also paying a little bit more in taxes is probably the worst thing in the world to them. And as Emma Vigeland points out, he instinctively reached for something terrible to describe it as, because to him, it is the worst thing in the world. It is the Maginot Line breaking. It's the Nazis flooding into France. Oh my God, what is happening? And so that's why you have the freak out here. And so this is what power looks like when it's afraid of losing its own power. When the realization has started to sink in that Bernie Sanders is very likely going to be the Democratic nominee and subsequently the next president of the United States. Yikes. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to take a quick break. We'll come back. I'll thank some patrons, some channel members, read some comments, of course, from you guys. And then we're going to go into Bernie Sanders explains how we're going to pay for it. That's a question a lot of people love to know. And then we've got electability. And so we'll talk about that coming up after this break. Stay right here. Please like and share the stream, and we'll be back in a couple minutes around the nation. Welcome back to the show. On the nation right here, TYT Nation, Jeff Waldorf here with you. All right, so let's go to first patreon.com/TYT Nation. Thank a few patrons. I want to thank Sylvia Ross and Thomas Lockwood Jr. So thank you. Thank you, Thomas and Sylvia, for supporting independent progressive media. Of course, if you're a patron of the show, you get the audio version of the show without any breaks or any ads or anything like that. So you can download that to your maybe podcast device or your phone or whatever, and take it wherever you want to go. Kind of efficient, don't you think? That's pretty cool. Let's see. Then channel members as well support the show. So I want to thank Actus Magus and Sarge Tag. So to stalwart members, thank you so much. You guys are awesome. All right. As far as comments go, take a couple of member comments here. Jonathan Under6 says, name one time that an establishment candidate lost to Trump. I don't know. This is, I think her name is some with an H. Heather? No, Hillary. Oh, yeah, Hillary Clinton. I think she was hiding out in the woods last. Yeah. No, she's a great example of an establishment candidate that lost to Donald Trump. And turns out she was even less popular than Donald Trump and is still less popular than Donald Trump, if you can even imagine it. I mean, even with everything that he has done in his first term, Hillary Clinton is somehow still less popular. Look, and here's the thing. She could have rehabilitated her image by doing positive things. Instead, what she has been doing since she came out of hiding was going around with book tours, right? Blaming Bernie Sanders and attacking him. That's it. And then, of course, take shots at Trump, obviously, but not doing anything really all that positive for the discourse. It's insane. And so, yeah, there's a reason why people still don't like her, why she is less popular than the most unpopular president in the history of the country. Jedi Protector, by the way, another member says, look at me, regarding, of course, Donald Jr. Look at me. I also fly with the normal people, yo. Yes. Look at me. I am the normal people. I am like you, just like you, but with piles and piles of money. And I am also famous. Isn't he the one that's also dating the Fox News personality, Kimberly Guilfoyle? I don't know. I think so. I think that's the case. And then finally, non-member comment here from Even Flow saying they want things to stay the same because they personally benefit from neoliberalism, referring, of course, to the media. Yeah, I mean, look, that is something too. They do want things to stay the same, obviously, because things are really good for them in their bubble, in their social economic class, right? There's also another thing to it. I think they are legitimately, since they don't understand, I think they're legitimately afraid that Bernie Sanders can't beat Trump because it goes against everything that they have taught and known their entire lives. Again, I think we're in uncharted territory. And I know it seems like I'm giving Chris Matthews a lot of credit, but I'm not. I'm just saying that he's old, out of touch, and those two are not synonymous, by the way. There are plenty of older people who are absolutely 100% with it. But there are people, too, that still live in a different generation, and that is somebody like Chris Matthews. And a lot of, unfortunately, the establishment pundits. Now, what is interesting, though, is that since this happened, and since MSNBC was basically caught embarrassed by, a lot of their commentary, especially as it pertained to Nevada, where a lot of them thought that Bernie Sanders wasn't even going to make it this far. Again, Dr. Jason Johnson said that he was going to be out by August. before Iowa, before any of this. And so, I mean, last August. And so it's crazy. They have no idea what's going on, and they don't understand their own electorate. And so they were saying that, hey, we're going to bring on some more, pro-Sanders voices. Well, that would make, assuming that they're going to bring on at least one pro-Sanders voice, that would make one. Because there's literally no one else on the network that is pro-Sanders. They are old establishment Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama folks, and conservatives as well. Hey, look, I have a suggestion. I mean, if you're looking for somebody who, is a pro-Sanders voice, who lives in the Midwest, right? Because they're very very concerned about the Midwest, what the average Rust Belt voter, thinks. Place that seems some, upheaval in maybe the auto industry, and yet who is still progressive, does a show. I don't know. Maybe you could bring on somebody like that, like me. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that, sure, if you want somebody, well, I seem to have a few of the qualifications that you're looking for. We'll see if that happens. Okay. All right. Let's move on here. Another comment here, just because it's fun. Let's see. Tim Black calls him Jackass Jason Johnson now. Oh, and he's the only person who isn't a Johnson. Well, Tim Black, that's an interesting name, and so I'll give him credit for that, because that is pretty hilarious. So that's good. All right, let's move on here. Different sidebar.
Here's what I want to do. Chris, I'm going to give this to you. I thought that question might come up. All right, here it is. This is a list which will be on our website tonight of how we pay for every program that we have developed.
That was Senator Bernie Sanders at last night's CNN town hall, addressing the oft-asked question of, how are you going to pay for that? As if we haven't heard that, of course, ad nauseum ever since, or every time someone brings up a progressive policy. How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? I mean, it sounds great, but how are you going to pay for it? I mean, we can't afford it. I don't know, Chris. Maybe we should, I don't know, stop giving the military $750 billion a year to bomb brown kids for oil. That would be a great start. Maybe then we could afford some, I don't know, health care for sick children and adults who are forced to ration their insulin. I mean, the entire framing bothers me because it's very conservative. And there's a reason. It is brought forward. It was thought up by these think tanks and brought forward by people in the industry who would rather put their profits over the health and well-being of its citizens. So, and they're the ones who also say, no, we can't when it comes to universal health care, free college. But yes, when it comes to tax cuts for corporations and more endless warfare. And so to answer the question, by the way, because he handed Cuomo a sheet, and I am now going to read some of that on how to pay for example, Medicare for all. Now, first, they would create a 4% income-based premium paid for by employees, working people, right? So that's a tax increase on Americans, and at least he's being honest about this and saying, yes, we will raise taxes on American families. Now, there's an exemption in this. They exempt the first $29,000 of income for a family of four, so it won't hit the poorest Americans, right? Now, again, he's not BSing you and saying that, oh, no tax increases on the middle class. We're going to pay for this by only hitting the rich. Well, that's not realistic. And he's honest about that. He didn't pull an Elizabeth Warren and say, hey, no, well, we're going to totally not tax the middle class and somehow make this work. Now, the thing is that while there is a tax increase on the middle class, the average American family will end up saving money. Now, there are some details here. For example, in 2008, the typical working family paid an average of $6,015 in premiums to private health insurance companies. Under this option, a typical family of four earning $60,000 a year would pay a 4% income-based premium to fund Medicare for all on income above $29,000. So that's marginal. And that equals out to about $1,240 per year. Now, if you do the math, right? Normally they now pay about $6,015. That is, that's premiums. That doesn't involve deductibles and copays, right? That's just in premiums. Well, this 4% tax that will go to fund Medicare for all actually saves them quite a bit of money. And by the way, families of four making less than $29,000 a year don't pay this at all. Now, the estimated money raised would be $4 trillion over 10 years. And so that would raise that revenue to then pay for Medicare for all. Now, there are more details about this. They would also impose a 7.5% income-based premium paid for by employers that exempts the first $1 million in payroll in order to protect small businesses. So that's important because, again, these small businesses are the most hurt, right? Or would be the most hurt by an increase of taxes. They're also the least likely to be able to offer insurance plans to their employees. Well, now those small businesses are exempt from paying that and no longer have to support and actually provide health insurance to their employees if they can afford it. So now the details on this go back to, again, from 2018. Employers paid an average of about $14,000 in private health insurance premiums for a worker with a family of four. Under this option, employers would pay a 7.5% payroll tax to help finance Medicare for all. Just $4,500, a savings of more than $10,000 per year. That savings, of course, is good for business because they no longer, again, are required or will have to pay for their employees' insurance costs directly or share costs. So that's interesting, right? That's also money that can either be reinvested into the business or go to, more importantly, employee pay and benefits. Not only that, but workers who lose their jobs, if the company decides they need to downsize, will not lose their health insurance, and so they'll still be covered. Or if there are people that decide they want to either reduce their hours or move to a different career, or even start their own businesses and their own ideas, and still will be covered by health insurance. Now, raising the business tax on this would raise about $5.2 trillion over the next 10 years. Now, you would also eliminate health tax expenditures, which would no longer be needed under Medicare for all. That would raise about $3 trillion over 10 years. They would also raise the top marginal tax rate to 52% on income over $10 million. That would raise about $700 billion over the next 10 years. Now, remember, this is a marginal tax. I know conservatives like Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk want to lie to you and exploit you by pretending that they either don't know or that, more importantly, they think that you're too stupid to understand what a marginal tax rate is. Now, if you don't know, and a lot of people don't, and that's okay, basically marginal taxes mean that, for this example, the 52% rate kicks in on every dollar after you hit $10 million in income. So anything below that is taxed at a lower level. If you were making $29,000 a year, you are not touched, you are not affected. Now, it would also, by the way, replace the cap on the state and local tax deduction with an overall dollar cap of $50,000 for a married couple on any and all itemized deductions. Now, this is a bit more in the weeds, a bit more complicated. But look, here's the thing. Trump already got rid of the state and local tax deduction, by the way, in the Trump tax cuts. That's why people in both New York and California now end up paying more in taxes effectively because they're not able to take those SALT deductions. So that's already gone, right? Bernie Sanders, he's not going to bring it back, but instead he's going to allow you to have a $50,000 deduction, right, for a married couple on older itemized deductions. And again, this gets into the weeds in the tax laws, and unless you kind of do your taxes yourself, it's a little bit more difficult to understand. And not everybody uses itemized deductions as well. But nonetheless, they said that you would raise about the country would raise about $400 billion over the next 10 years. Taxing capital gains is another way. And they want to tax it at the same rate as income from wages, which right now, capital gains is taxed a lot less than regular wages. Not only that, but they would crack down on gaming through derivatives, like-kind exchanges, and the zero tax rate on capital gains passed through on bequests, right? So that would raise about $2.5 trillion over the next 10 years to go for Medicare for all. He would also enact for the 99.8% Act, which returns the estate tax exemption to the 2009 level of $3.5 million. They would close loopholes, increase rates on progressively, including by adding a top tax rate of 77% on estate values in excess of $1 billion. Now that is bound to make rich people very unhappy because the estate tax is one of those things where it's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. It's the death tax. They're going to tax us twice. They're going to tax me when I die. That's actually not true at all. It's a really, really ridiculous talking point. In reality, what the estate tax does is that when you die, right, that money gets passed on, of course, to your heirs, to your children, right? That's if you don't give it away to charity and things like that. Now, these heirs who didn't work for that money will get taxed on that money when they inherit it. So again, they didn't earn that money and they're actually getting taxed on it for the first time. And so the person who earned the money in the first place gets taxed once. So understand that there is a false conservative narrative around this entire thing. The estate tax, by the way, is not going to affect 99% of you. There's very, very few states here over that much money that will be subject to the estate tax. Now, since there is not a lot of estates, it really won't raise a lot of money. Actually, about $336 billion over the next 10 years is how much they would raise from increasing the estate tax. Now, they would also enact corporate tax reform and reverse the Trump tax cuts for the rich and corporations. Now, it would go from 21% back up to 35%, which is where it used to be during the Obama presidency. Now, that would raise $3 trillion, right? And by the way, rolling back the Trump tax cuts for corporations, it's not going to hurt corporations. You know what they've done with that money? They've used it to buy back their own stock and increase CEO compensation. That's all it is, right? And so, I'm sorry, raising that back is actually a good idea because it's not going to hurt business and it's not shown to have hurt businesses. Now, and by the way, cutting the taxes hasn't shown to help the businesses either. There are still places that have decided to shut down and move to even lower tax havens, right? So now, that $3 trillion, as I said, one of it, $1 trillion, would actually fund Medicare for all. The rest would actually go to the Green New Deal. And so now, by the way, the Green New Deal and healthcare are actually linked. In fact, a lot of Sanders' policies are linked with each other. And so they're very interconnected and interdependent in being able to work. So now there's another one here, and that's a wealth tax. They would use $350 billion in the amount raised from the tax on extreme wealth to finance Medicare for all. So that's a lot of detail. Is that enough for you, CNN? Is that enough? It should be noted that right now, we in America pay twice as much per capita as Canada for healthcare, who has a single payer system. So, I mean, we would see massive savings as overhead is, of course, is cut to Medicare levels, right? You don't have that massive bureaucratic bloat that you do in private health insurance. No middlemans, or no middlemen, I should say, and no advertising costs or executive bonuses to worry about or anything like that. So it would make healthcare administration far more efficient, which saves a ton of money. It also saves your doctor time since they don't have to spend their time on the phone with the health insurance company to try to figure out what they're going to cover, what they're not going to cover, to try to haggle something out. No, the doctor can actually spend more time on you, making sure that your health needs are met. That's it. So there you are. That is a detailed breakdown of how exactly Bernie Sanders plans to pay for Medicare for all. Hopefully, we will never see that question again. But sadly, I don't think they will stop asking that question. But if they do, you can show them this video, and all their questions will be answered. Okay. Moving on here. Following popular vote wins in all three early states, including the crucial Nevada caucus, Bernie Sanders is proving that he is entirely electable. Now, that is despite the cries from establishment hacks and angry MSNBC personalities who have been declaring otherwise. Bernie's momentum is nearly unstoppable at this point. His support from minority communities is growing, and no one save Biden is anyone near him in polling. And by the way, Biden has less delegates than Pete Buttigieg. And so Bernie Sanders is leading in all accounts of the race. And when it comes to delegate counts, as I said, Bernie leads by a huge margin. So it's time to get rid of the notion that Bernie is unelectable and that his policies are not wanted by the American people. Now, during last night's CNN town hall, he did an audience poll of some of his policies, and he asked them whether or not they are radical. Take a look.
Let me just tell you, I don't think that that's true. Is raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour a radical idea? No. Is making sure that all of our kids have the opportunity to get a higher education, regardless of their income, because we're going to make public colleges and universities tuition free, is that a radical idea? No. This is a scientific poll. You hearing this? Is doing what every other major country on earth does. Jane and I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. Somehow they managed to guarantee health care for every man, woman, and child in that country at half the cost that we spend per capita. Is guaranteeing health care to all people as a human right a radical idea? No! Is addressing the existential threat of climate change a radical idea? No! All right, I rest my case.
All right, so it's not just that crowd of people that were enthusiastic, and Democratic voters, I assume. But look, it's the American people as well. There's a lot of support for things like single payer. Even, by the way, 51% of Americans support single payer. That is according to the most recent Kaiser Family Foundation poll. You know, back earlier, say 2018, it had a 70% approval rating. So what happened? Well, it turns out that Republicans have attacked this, and as well as corporate Democrats, mercilessly, and they managed to get it down to still just slightly over half of all Americans. Fascinating. Now, 54% of independents, by the way, which is important, also support single payer. Now, it is true that a public option does poll better, with total of 66% support. But what the public doesn't know about a public option is that, unfortunately, it has a lot of the same problems that make the insurance system, private insurance system, unaffordable today. It doesn't do anything about the rising of prices, and still, by the way, requires the payment of premiums and deductibles. Now, one thing that was, and copays, by the way, one thing that was interesting is a lot of people also mistakenly think that Medicare for All also involves copays, premiums, and deductibles, just like insurance. So it's almost as if Americans still consider a Medicare for All single payer system similar to insurance. It's almost as if we're stuck in that mindset because we don't understand that there is a better way of doing healthcare, of health insurance, and that is through a single payer option, which does not involve copays, premiums, or deductibles. And so that is interesting. And that is probably one of the reasons why a public option is right now more favorable. Nonetheless, he is not hurt by his support for Medicare for all. In fact, that actually endears voters to him because he is being consistent, unlike Elizabeth Warren, for example, and he sticks by his guns, and he's being honest about this, right? So now, as far as Bernie goes, and kind of tying that along with that is that he's the most popular politician in the country by a large margin. Polls also have him as most trusted candidate on healthcare. That's even when, by the way, he was polling behind Vice President Joe Biden in national surveys, which is now, of course, over. Bernie Sanders is now leading the field nationally in the primary, and then in a lot of different battleground states as well. Now, polls have Bernie Sanders beating Donald Trump in a lot of matchups. For example, the latest UW-Madison Elections Research Center survey, Sanders has a bigger lead over Trump in Michigan and Pennsylvania. No surprise, since he won Michigan here in 2016. And a lot of people that decided that they would vote for Donald Trump instead because Bernie Sanders was no longer on the ballot. Not only that, but you also had a 2-point lead over Donald Trump in Wisconsin, as Joe Biden, as Elizabeth Warren do. So he wins in all of these different states in matchups against Donald Trump. Not only that, but he beats Trump even more than a lot of his rivals in national polling. For example, Bernie Sanders leads Trump by 3 points, 47-44. Biden, of course, beats Trump still at 47-45, so a little bit closer of a margin. You also have Warren barely beating Trump by 1 point, 46-45. Buttigieg tying Donald Trump, Klobuchar losing to Trump by 1 point, and Bloomberg losing to Trump by 3 points. So much for Michael Bloomberg. Now, Bernie Sanders has also proven that he can win over moderate voters, as he did in Nevada. Now, in the Nevada caucus, Sanders won a plurality of self-identified moderate or conservative Democrats. In fact, the Washington Post's Matt Visser tweeted this: the Sanders win was emphatic. He prevailed among those with college degrees and those without. Again, Elizabeth Warren tends to do better with college-educated white liberals. Even so, Bernie Sanders was the second choice. Not only that, but you had in-union and not in-union people. The culinary union, for example, healthcare was their major concern, even though they have great healthcare through the culinary union. 6 in 10 of the union members who voted in the Nevada caucus said that healthcare, they support a single-payer government-run insurance system. That is very important, and I think I know why. They have excellent insurance, and they want to make sure every other American has that same insurance. There is nothing better than peace of mind when it comes to something so important as health. Not only that, but he also won basically in every age group except for those over 65, and had narrowly carried moderates and conservatives in Nevada. Sanders also does extremely well with the backbone of any Democratic coalition: minorities. Exit polling from Nevada showed Bernie Sanders with the support of 69% of Latino voters. 69%. Nationally, Morning Consult poll showed that Sanders has overtaken Biden with black voters nationally. 33% of black voters said that they had backed Bernie Sanders. 29% said that they would back Joe Biden. And often, weirdly enough, a lot of Biden voters consider Bernie Sanders to be their second choice. I find that absolutely fascinating. But look, it's kind of our own bubble, right? Because people are complicated. Some Bernie Sanders voters, or some Amy voters, for example, Klobuchar, might consider Bernie Sanders to be the second choice. I mean, it's weird. I don't get it, but it is what it is. And so you can't necessarily put people in little boxes and expect them to stay there, which is fascinating and actually really good for someone like Bernie Sanders. to have someone who considers maybe Pete Buttigieg number one to say, you know what, I would go for Bernie Sanders. He's my number two choice, or vice versa, even as this happens in some of the cases. You never know. You never know. And so that also shows that they didn't care about, for example, the Russia stuff, right? There was a report that came out on the eve, I think it was actually the day before the Nevada caucus, that claimed that Bernie Sanders was being supported by Vladimir Putin, right? By the Russians. So that report, and it blew up on Twitter, by the way, as it often does, things like that, where Bernie Sanders had been briefed a month ago that there are people apparently online, Russian bots and trolls, that would like to back Bernie Sanders in order to elevate him to take on Donald Trump, to which the assumption is he would lose to Donald Trump, right? And so I remember a lot of angry, Hillary Clinton trolls and things like that, that were getting very angry at him. A lot of pundits were getting very angry at Bernie Sanders and Democratic establishment figures. Oh my God, how dare Bernie Sanders not share classified information from a classified briefing with the American public on Russia? But again, nobody cared about that in Nevada. It wasn't even in consideration. And so, sorry. Now, there's also other stuff. The supposed rape essay, which, by the way, that wasn't a rape essay. It was actually fighting in a weird way against traditional gender roles. People didn't care about all that stuff. So all the people that say I've supposed giant oppo dumps on Bernie Sanders is going to sink him. No, none of that is effective. Voters only care about, at least Democratic voters only care about one thing: beating Donald Trump. And I believe Bernie would do that. That's why you heard video of saying, Donald Trump would rather have gone up against Hillary Clinton and would rather now go up against Michael Bloomberg, because he does not want to go up against Bernie Sanders. Why? It's because I think he knows he would have a very, very difficult time, if not could possibly lose the election. Whereas you put him against Amy Klobuchar, he's going to have a much easier time going against someone like that. And not only that, but a lot of voters care about authenticity, and they like him because he's consistent and because he's honest. Even a lot of Republicans out there do appreciate the honesty, even if they don't agree with him on policy. He's not a slimy politician like Mayor Pete. They know at least what they're getting. Now, all of this shows that, of course, that Bernie Sanders is not a radical person. He's right in the pulse of the American people. They like him. They trust him. They agree with him on most of the policy positions. And they also believe, unlike last time, that he could beat Donald Trump. If that is not the picture of electability, well, then I'm not sure what is. All right. Let's do something real quick. Pete Buttigieg story. Presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg is not faring well in South Carolina. At one point, during one of his visits to a rally, Pete was literally chased out by protesters. So now this rally was organized by Fight for 15 and involved a group called Black Votes Matter, or Black Voters Matter. Now, Fight for 15 was calling on McDonald's workers to unionize and strike for better pay and better wages, right? So now during that rally, Pete Buttigieg decides he's going to show up, I think uninvited, and, well, let's just say it went kind of poorly. Protesters, according to Tampa Bay Times political editor Steve Contorno, who was there at the rally, said that protesters began heckling Mr. Buttigieg at the demonstration. Quote, one of the protesters saying, Where was 15 in South Bend? Pete can't be our president. According to another editor, according to the editor, one Black Voters Matter protester yelled at Buttigieg saying, "How dare you? This is a worker strike." Pete, of course, not being an actual worker. Now, Brittany Smalls, a coordinator with the organization Black Voters Matter, came down from Pennsylvania, by the way, to support the efforts for a higher minimum wage, said she stepped away from the protesters when Buttigieg appeared behind a banner at the front of the march that read "Unions for All." She said, quote, "I stepped away when he decided to join the race for photo ops because that's all he does." And she's not the only one who thought so. Nick Rubin, a Charleston resident who volunteers with Fight for 15 and supports Bernie Sanders, said he also attended the rally to support the protest. But when Buttigieg showed up, he was a little angry. Quote, "Pete is using them cynically as a photo op to pretend he cares about working class people." Now, Buttigieg addressed the crowd as he was being heckled, according to Reuters, saying, quote, "No matter who you support for president, I support you and I support unions and a $15 minimum wage." Actually, so to do a little correction, by the way, I believe he was invited to this. And so he showed up and there were, look, let's be honest, he was being welcomed by some of the protesters, right? But others were not thrilled about this. Now, Mr. Contorno, who attended the event, tweeted this: "Buttigieg had to race into his car after the rally as he was chased down by Black Voters Matter protesters." Reuters, of course, then followed that account. He then began running towards his vehicle to avoid a confrontation with protesters. "Gone, get in the car. Gone, gone." How entirely Pete-like to run away. And the reason is, look, there are a lot of people that didn't welcome his presence there. And it's not just because of his low support among the African-American voting bloc, but I think it's because of who he is. Pete Buttigieg is not for workers. In fact, he's literally the image that you get in your head when you think of management. And that's it. He's also what would happen if all the office inspirational posters combined and became sentient. Nothing but empty platitudes. so much air you would float away. But look, his real record, by the way, was working against workers at McKinsey. McKinsey used to advise different places that were facing financial troubles. And the first thing that they would do, instead of saying maybe the management or executives should forego some of their bonuses and decrease their own pay, their first go-to is, let's fire people. That'll help. Let's fire more employees. So he's not exactly pro-worker, okay? That's who Buttigieg is. He is management that is pretending to be your friend. He's pretending to care about you. Management, as I've learned, is almost never your friend. Now, earlier in the day, during the McDonald's event, protesters also hit Buttigieg for not getting people $15 an hour in South Bend. Now, I'm actually going to defend that point, Pete Buttigieg on that point, because Indiana state law doesn't allow municipalities to require minimum wage for private businesses. So he didn't really, he wasn't really allowed to do that. But he could set minimums for city employees. And so did he do that? Well, during the North Charleston Forum, he said he had instituted minimum wages for city employees that were, quote, north of $10 an hour and on the path to $15. A little bit of change, tiny bit of change, but not really. On the path. So basically, no. He didn't use his power to set a living wage when he could have set a living wage. So the entire thing is why, of course, it's a perfect illustration of why people don't like Pete Buttigieg. He's an empty suit. He shows up, gives flowery language, and does platitudes, and can't back it up with action. This is at a time when people cannot see, or when they can actually see through the BS. Because back before, there was a time, and this is where he reminds me of, and I know I'm going to wrinkle some feathers here or ruffle some feathers, but back in the time with Obama. Obama was sort of the same thing, flowery language, great orator, knew what he was doing, right? When it comes to, politicking as a progressive. But when it came time to deliver, He didn't on a lot of things. And some of it wasn't his fault, but some of it was. And he didn't fight for those issues. And so Pete Buttigieg is like your, it's like your cheap ripoff of Obama, kind of, right? That's what it reminds me of. It's like the cereal, right? The brand name stuff versus what you get in the bag. So Pete Buttigieg is bagged cereal. He's off brand. And so it's not appealing because he's literally a copy and he's faking it. And that is the biggest problem with Buttigieg. And that's why he doesn't resonate with working people, because at the end of the day, Pete Buttigieg is basically a fraud. All right. So that's it. That's all I got for you guys today. Thank you for going around the nation with me. Please like and share the stream. Please consider becoming a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation, or supporting us by becoming a channel member, or, buy lovely merchandise that we have. Really, all of that goes to help offset what we have basically suffered through, not only delisting, demonetization, but also not being considered an authoritative source when it comes to news and politics. So we're getting crushed here by YouTube, and we need, of course, your help to continue doing the show. So thank you, guys. Love you. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation. See you guys later.